I'm Adam Pasquarella, and welcome to episode 37 of The Power of Bold.
From New York City, it's The Power of Bold, the podcast on risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. Join us as we interview world-class performers, analyze life-changing books, and gather actionable insights to help you achieve your goals. Here's your host, Adam Pasquarella.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this first episode of the podcast for 2019. I hope everyone had a great New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Many of you probably came up with some resolutions for this year, so I wish you all the best in keeping up with them. If at any point you struggle with them or start feeling demotivated, I'd highly recommend that you listen to episode 23, which is my interview with Jeff Hayden, the author of The Motivation Myth. Anyway, one of your resolutions may be that this is the year that you leave your job to start a business. If this sounds about right for you, you're in for a real treat for this episode. We're kicking off this year with a bang, as I'm excited to share my conversation with Steve Glaveski. Steve is an Australian entrepreneur who has built several impressive ventures. He's a co-founder and the CEO of Collective Campus, which is a corporate innovation and startup accelerator. And he also started Lemonade Stand, a children's entrepreneurship program, and a popular podcast called Future Squared. Most recently, Steve authored a book titled Employee to Entrepreneur: How to Earn Your Freedom and Do Work That Matters. The book will be available on January 9th on Amazon. I really enjoyed my conversation with Steve. We touched on many topics, including the critical factors to consider when transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, why venture capital funding may not be the right decision for you, the importance of following data to achieve product market fit, and what you should consider if you're thinking of hiring an external developer to build your minimum viable product. I'm excited to share this conversation with you, so without further ado, here's Steve Glaveski. Steve Glaveski, thanks for joining me on The Power of Bold.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Now, you have a new book coming out. It's called Employee to Entrepreneur: How to Earn Your Freedom and Do Work That Matters. And it's a great story, not only of how you made the transition into entrepreneurship, but your thoughts on everything from idea generation to managing your time as a busy entrepreneur. But having said all that, I'd like to start by speaking about one of the most consequential moments of your entrepreneurial career, and that is your transition from full-time employee to full-time entrepreneur. So let's give the listeners some context. In your book, you provide a nice summary of your 14-year professional life thus far, and it was from working at Westpac Bank to Ernst & Young and a couple other jobs in between. And at E&Y, you're gaining momentum in your career and you're moving up the corporate ladder, yet you decide to do something different. So can you take us back to that time when you were seriously contemplating an entrepreneurial career? What was really going through your mind?
Sure. So, it's similar to yourself, Adam. I know you spent you spent a few years at Baker and McKenzie as a lawyer, and no doubt spent many more years before that trying to get into the legal profession. And I had done the same. I'd got a master's degree by that point, so I'd spent a good 5 to 6 years in university. I'd spent about 8 years in the corporate world working for brands like you mentioned, in addition to KPMG and Macquarie Bank, one of Australia's biggest investment banks. But despite all of that, despite having achieved what at the time might be perceived as aligning with society's conventions of what success looks like, I was 29, I had a 6-figure salary, I had the opportunity to fly around the world, usually business class flights and all of that good stuff. But deep down, I guess you could say I was miserably comfortable. And that aligns with something that Robert Greene said on my show last week. So the author of the 48 Laws of Power, which I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with, was saying that a lot of people run around living a false purpose. And they do so because they do it for money, for social status, for a feeling of importance. But very rarely does it align with what their true inclinations are, where their strengths lie, what really gets them out of bed in the morning. And despite all of the trappings of success, deep down I was miserably comfortable. I'd be standing on the train station platform, as I say in the book, at the end of the day, catching the train home and thinking, what did I actually contribute today? And oftentimes I just wouldn't know, because the nature of my work was one whereby I would effectively help listed companies comply with their SEC obligations. We'd make a bunch of recommendations. Most of those recommendations wouldn't be heeded. We'd come back the next year and do the same thing. So it wasn't really fulfilling, and it didn't really align with my strengths. So I ultimately observed that in my line of work, there was a lot of vacant office space wherever I went. And so like every second or third person in the startup ecosystem these days, I decided to build a marketplace, an Airbnb for office space, as it were, called Hotdesk. Mm-hmm. And this is where I guess I took a little bit of an unconventional path, at least back then. Nowadays, MVPs and prototyping is all the rage, and so it should be, because you should definitely test your ideas before you go out and build the grand scale version. But what I did was I literally spent about $2,000 on a prototype using an Airbnb script and a web developer I found on freelancer.com. The prototype was good enough to list space, to search for space, to browse, to add photos, and to actually book and pay online. So it did quite a bit for a $2,000 prototype. But I had a prototype, I had no customers, I had no traffic. So I decided that I would put together a press release. I had no idea how to write a press release. So I just Googled how to write a press release and tried my hand at it. And at that point in time, I wasn't familiar, nor do I think tools like Rocket Reach or Hunter.io existed, which are, for those of you who don't know, growth hacking tools where you can find pretty much anybody's email address. So in order to find the email addresses of journalists who I wanted to send this press release to, I went onto Twitter and I found journalists via searching journalist in Twitter, and most journalists have an email address in their profile. And I'd pull that out, I'd put that into a spreadsheet, and then I'd proceed one by one to send personalized emails to about 100 journalists.
Huh.
How many do you think got back to me?
Maybe one. I think it was
maybe one. It was one. It was one. So you have read the book, which is great. And it was 1 out of 100. And it just happened to be a journalist from the Australian, which is Australia's biggest national newspaper, a circulation of about 500,000 people. And that got picked up. 2 weeks later, they ran a full-page feature article on Hotdesk. That got picked up in the Macquarie News, which was a daily email sent to 14,000 employees of the bank I was working for at the time, because it mentioned I was a Macquarie Bank employee. My manager gave me a tap on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Steve, what's this Hotdesk stuff all about?" I had to assure him that it was just a side project. But on the back of that article, within 3 months, I had investors coming to me, and I managed to raise about $156,000, which was enough for me to say, okay, let's give this a couple of years. And that side project became my full-time gig.
That's a cool story, and I'm always interested in entrepreneurs' genesis stories, and that one's especially cool just because you hustled your way to getting that initial funding, and you went from there. But going back to what you were saying, so you're at Ernst & Young, you're at Macquarie. You could have gotten another job. You didn't necessarily have to become an entrepreneur. And I know you were talking about that, having that false purpose, that sense of false purpose. Mm-hmm. So what was it that entrepreneurship had that your career path didn't have at that time? And why did you choose entrepreneurship?
Great question. So, and I do put forward a number of alternatives in the book that people can explore if they are contemplating entrepreneurship, because it's easy to get enamored by the bright lights of entrepreneurship, but it's not easy. If you're not having a good time at work because you don't like your boss, you don't like the type of work you're doing, you want to get paid a little bit more, whatever other reason, there's many alternatives. You could just find a job somewhere else. You might want to make a lateral move. You might want to go back to school or do some online courses and get into a different profession, or maybe you're just bored and you want to take up a hobby on the side. Like, these are all things that can allay some of those issues. In my case, I did explore those things. While I was at Macquarie Bank, I did explore making a lateral move into their Macquarie Capital division, which is basically their investment banking decision and investing in early stage tech startups and things of that nature, which was somewhat appealing to me. But I guess entrepreneurship was the one that came off. And if I always say that to people, if your organization is giving you the opportunity to really put your DNA on the firm, to create, to solve problems, if you feel like you're learning and growing there, if they're paying you well and treating you well, why pursue entrepreneurship? The only reason you really would want to pursue entrepreneurship is if you're not given the opportunity to grow internally. Two, you want those big financial rewards that come with being your own boss. And perhaps three, you want to do something You want the freedom to do something completely new, which is fraught with risk, which is really what early stage startups are all about. And if you're working for a large organization that has its existing repeatable business model, it's making money, it's a listed company, it's accountable to its shareholders, the likelihood that they're going to really back something that's your blue sky Horizon 3 disruptive innovation, as Clayton Christensen likes to define it, is very, very low.
Sure.
So if you truly want that freedom, then entrepreneurship is the way to go.
Interesting. And so when you're at Macquarie, you were saying that you were kind of observing the world around you, and you saw all of this open office space. And in the book, I think it was in chapter 2 or 3, you talk about this idea about collecting the dots. You need to collect them before you connect them. I'm assuming you're referring to the Steve Jobs commencement speech at Stanford, where you can only connect the dots looking backward, that sort of idea. So that was the most significant dot, I guess, on your radar. You could have pursued any entrepreneurial project. So what was it about office space and renting it out that really spoke to you?
Well, it's a funny question because I don't think anything about it really spoke to me. In retrospect, I think I say in the book that after 2 years of trying to build out Hotdesk, I had some success building out the supply side, and moderate success with the demand side. But entrepreneurship is tough, and it's kind of like rolling that big boulder uphill. And if you're going to play the long game, you need to do something you truly believe in. And at the end of that journey, I just found that I had no real desire to be a glorified real estate agent, as I put it. Certain things did speak to me about that journey, which was at its core, it was about helping, say, entrepreneurs, flexible workers, freelancers find space and connect with different types of people, which is then going to help them collect dots and perhaps drive their careers forward. But at its core, it was really a real estate booking website. And for me, I guess I didn't really believe that the value it was creating was, above and beyond what other organizations were doing in the space, or whether it was your existing co-working spaces. I mean, WeWork was about to come onto the scene as well, which completely transformed the dynamics of the co-working scene. And then you had your serviced office space operators, rather. There was many other ways around what Hotdesk was doing. And so I didn't really believe that we were going to change the world in any meaningful way. And therefore, why struggle so much unless you truly believe in what you're doing? But I guess what it was about Hotdesk was it kind of piggybacked off some of the skills, if you will, that I had picked up in the corporate world. Just around the consulting work that I had done. And it was really just a matter of serendipity. Like one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And that's what often happens in entrepreneurship. And I often tell people nowadays that if you don't really know what you want to do, if you're not 100% sure, that's normal. That's completely fine. And I often refer to Paulo Coelho's story, The Alchemist, in which the young shepherd Santiago goes on this big journey across the desert in search of treasure, only to find that the treasure was at his feet the whole time. But in order to learn that, he needed to go on this journey. And oftentimes entrepreneurship is like that. And for me, Hotdesk was really just part of that journey that ultimately led me to my true purpose, which is what I'm doing now. But even now, there's nothing to say that, okay, now that I'm doing something that I truly believe in, that gets me out of bed with a spring in my step every morning, that doesn't mean that is not going to change. I think our purpose needs to be malleable as the world changes outside our four walls as well.
I think that's a really important point, because a lot of smart people, in my experience speaking with them, that are in corporate jobs or in professional settings, believe that they almost have to have everything figured out before they take the leap, whether that's some world-changing idea or millions of dollars of sales or revenues, something like that. And what you just said reminds me of the point that you don't really know what's going to happen. The unknown is the unknown for a reason. And once you actually take that first step and put yourself out there, some doors that you didn't even imagine will open up. And so that's, in my entrepreneurial experience and others, I think that's an important point. You just have to put yourself out there, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit your job today, but even just starting on the side, like you did. In your bio, you said that you started a heavy metal nightclub when you were even working at a Macquarie or E&Y or either one of those. So even something like that, that's that's something very extreme. I'd like to hear your story on that. But I guess that goes to another point of how do you juggle all of these things when you're at a day job and you're thinking of starting something on the side or becoming an entrepreneur? Does it just require superior time management skills, or say this nightclub venture that you had? How did you juggle that with your day job?
Yeah. So one thing is really you've got to want it bad enough. Otherwise, when the going gets tough, you'll say, "Oh, well, I can't prioritize that right now, so I'm just going to quit." Two, you want to focus on the things that actually create value, because in any business there are countless things you could spend your time on, but there's probably going to be very few that are really going to move the needle for you. And that's something that I've kind of tried to work on over the past couple of years, especially. I published an article at Harvard Business Review a couple of weeks ago called The Case for the 6-Hour Workday. And that article deep dives into effective prioritization, outsourcing, and automation tools, which means it frees you up to focus on the high value tasks that align with your strengths. Because if something is low value, if something doesn't align with your strengths, then chances are you shouldn't really be doing that. If it's high value and doesn't align with your strengths, find someone else to do it, delegate or outsource to someone who's better at that than you. If it's high value and aligns with your strengths, you should do that. If it's low value, then just get rid of it. And I think so many entrepreneurs, when they first get into this game, they get busy being busy, printing out business cards and getting, watermarked business cards and things of that nature. They get busy building their website, and they end up taking meetings with all sorts of people, none of which are really interested in their product, but are taking that meeting because they have nothing better to do and they're looking to get out of work for an hour or so. You need to be really, really cognizant about how you spend your time. In terms of how to manage that with your side hustle, if I was to do it again, and I kind of did this as well, which with Collective Campus, which is the company that I oversee right now, with Collective Campus, the first 7 months of the business, I didn't actually pay myself anything. But because I had a 10-year run in the corporate world, I was able to get myself a 2-day-a-week contract gig with KPMG. Now, contractor roles in the corporate world pay quite well. In my case, it was about $800 a day. So 2 days a week was more than enough to keep me going. And that meant that it freed me up for the rest of the week to focus full time, on the so-called side hustle. I call that a reverse side hustle, because the KPMG gig kind of becomes your side hustle. But what that means is you have your cognitive capacity free to focus on your business for longer, rather than me, say, going to my corporate gig for 8 to 10 hours a day, coming home at 7 p.m., having maybe 2 hours to spend. And those 2 hours, all hours aren't created equal. If I've been working mentally all day, then I'm probably done. If I've had my deep work, you can only really get into deep work for 4 to 5 hours a day. Now, if I've done that during my day, then whatever I'm going to put into my side hustle at 7 p.m. in the evening are going to be scraps. So if that's the case, if all you can do is put in scraps, then you really need to be focused on the high value stuff. But chances are you're not going to be able to do it really well. So if you have got a good corporate run behind you, then perhaps explore contract roles, a day or two a week. Is that going to be enough to satisfy your financial commitments? If so, do that and then free yourself up to really give your business idea the best of your brain and not just the scraps.
That's a really important point from my perspective. It seems like a lot of people either have to, or they think they have to go 100% into their startup or exploration of this new phase without taking an income, or they try to do it on the side, like you said, and putting their weakest hours toward that task, and you're going to get a subpar result. That's just a natural consequence, it seems like. And so having that middle ground is a really important option for people. I'm glad that you discussed that. And so you're at Macquarie, you're considering leaving for Hotdesk. What, in your experience, what do you think was the most important or significant decision that set yourself up for success? Was it taking that intermediate role or something else?
Success with Hotdesk or success with Collective Campus?
I would say just your entrepreneurial career. Just in general.
Sure. I think the most important thing that set me up for success was really harnessing my strengths. So at the moment, for the last 3.5 years, I've been running Collective Campus, which is a corporate innovation and startup accelerator. And the reason that aligns with my strengths was because I did have a decade in the corporate world. So I am in a position whereby I do understand the dynamics inside these organizations, their procurement policies, how they buy things, how they speak, the language, what interests them, what the KPIs are, how they might be interested in innovation, what kind of products might they buy based on their budgets and so on. So based on that, I'm in a unique position whereby I can better sell to them. Whereas if I was, say, somebody who never spent time in the corporate world and then I decided that I'm going to teach corporates the lean startup methodology, I perhaps would struggle to do that because I am not cognizant of their purchasing policies, the way they go about making decisions, the fact that I need to sell 3 to 5 people internally before they can sign off on that check. There's a lot of nuances to selling to big organizations that one perhaps only develops an appreciation for when they've been in that space. But the second thing I would say is, other than the how to sell to large organizations, the second thing is really around the purpose. As somebody who was a frustrated entrepreneur for so many years, somebody who would say, propose different ways of doing things at organizations I'd worked for, and then have those ideas shut down because they didn't really align with any of the incentives that people had. And it was more a case of, let's just, do what we've always been doing because it works, rather than challenging the status quo. What I do now is ultimately helping to unlock the latent potential of frustrated entrepreneurs at these organizations, people who are just like me,
Sure.
Who have the drive, the enthusiasm, the talent, the ability, but are operating in organizations where they find themselves, they find those abilities inhibited quite a bit because they're all just geared towards delivering on the existing business model rather than discovering a new business model. So when I see that my work is actually helping to change the way these organizations do things and leverage their domain expertise, their resources, their assets, their people, most importantly, to create new value for the world, that really gets me excited. And that's when I do genuinely get out of bed in the morning with a spring in my step. And that's why I've then gone on and created a podcast and write books and published hundreds of blog posts, because it's about creating or sharing the knowledge that I've obtained through my work and sharing that with the world. So hopefully more people can actually start to empower themselves within these organizations. And if they can't, then they can re-employ an entrepreneur and make that leap outside.
Sure. No, you found your true purpose. Like you were saying, you were going up the corporate ladder and you were wondering, is this really right for me? Am I going to be in the corporate world forever? And you are in the corporate world to some extent, but you're on your own terms and you're creating businesses and you're writing books and podcasts. You're a very busy person, but it's everything on your own terms, which is really awesome. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for when they want to become entrepreneurs. But just one more quick question about the decision to leave. So Hotdesk is a thing, you got the press in the Australian newspaper. When you were actually deciding to leave and giving your notice, do you have any tips for people that are maybe feeling last second apprehension about taking the leap?
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Steve Jobs earlier, Adam, and one thing he said was, if he wakes up too many days in a row, looks in the mirror and says, I don't want to do what I'm about to do today or go to work today, then something needs to change. And if you have found yourself feeling somewhat incongruent at work for a long time, where perhaps the values that you hold true don't align with the values at work, for example, freedom, you might have values around learning. Maybe you're not learning at work. Maybe the type of work you're doing isn't something you truly believe in, something that doesn't resonate with you. Then you can keep doing that for the money, but it's going to leave you feeling quite miserable. You might end up taking that misery home with you. If you've got a family, you're probably not going to be the most pleasant person when you get back from the office late at night. Whereas if you're doing something that truly fills you with a sense of purpose, then you come home in the evening feeling fulfilled and you bring that energy with you into your home. And that can make a massive difference to your sense of well-being and mental clarity and happiness, as well as your families. And I mean, happiness at the end of the day is just the achievement of our values. So I guess deep down at its core, it's really about, do you believe that your current job is helping you achieve your values? And as Dan Pink says in his book Drive, does your job give you mastery, so the opportunity to get really good at something? Does it give you autonomy, the freedom to not only be in control of what you're working on, but to help guide the direction of that organization? And does it give you purpose? If it doesn't give you that, you might get the external, the extrinsic rewards, be it pay, be it bonuses, be it business class flights to exotic destinations. In our case, we had corporate junkets hosted by TV stars and things of that persuasion.
Yeah.
It was nice, but it's fleeting. And happiness, the actual feeling of happiness is fleeting. But if you have meaning at the core of what you do, then that's something that helps you ride not only the highs, but also the inevitable lows that will come both in business and in life. So really it comes down to that deeper piece of values alignment for me.
That's all important stuff. Yeah, I agree with that. And now, so you said you're working on Hotdesk, then you transitioned that into Collective Campus. You're also co-founder of Lemonade Stand, which is a children's entrepreneurship program. And like you said, you're the host of the Future Squared podcast. And so looking at all of your ventures, everything that you've done so far, you were saying that Hotdesk, you worked on it for 2 years, and it sounds like you iterated into Collective Campus, and now your current ventures are really succeeding. What do you think, what mistakes did you make when you were working on Hotdesk that you avoided in your current ventures? Or to put it another way, what are you doing now that is leading to your success versus maybe what a first-time entrepreneur would normally do?
Yeah, so in the book, I introduced a number of, I suppose, common pitfalls that first-time entrepreneurs fall into. And one of those is jumping to conclusions. And so with Hotdesk, I guess part of me jumped to conclusions thinking this was a great idea and got a false sense of validation through the funding that I was able to raise. And one thing I will say is that one should never conflate raising funding with market validation. When you raise capital, be it from an angel investor or a venture capitalist, that's basically a bet. You become their bet. They're hoping that you're maybe the 1 in 10 of their portfolio that covers all of the losses and helps them make a profit on top of that. It effectively makes you a financial instrument. And if you raise too early, it means that you'll be raising at a low valuation and giving away a larger chunk of your business and having less direction over where that business goes right from the get-go. So if you're getting out of the corporate world because you don't like being accountable to people, raising capital right off the bat isn't a good way to go.
Sure.
You should only raise capital if you've got something worth scaling. If you've got something worth scaling, you've got revenue, you've got customers, then you can raise on your terms. You can raise from more reputable investors who can genuinely help you, and you can give away less of your business. But in our case, we haven't taken on any external investment with Collective Campus. We want to keep it that way. We have taken on some grant funding early on in our journey, but I just see so many entrepreneurs fall into the trap of reading TechCrunch and Mashable and thinking that it's all about raising capital, and that just occupies most of their time for the first 6 months of their business, and it can ultimately be their undoing. And sometimes you'll find entrepreneurs who can spend 5 years, maybe 10 years working on their business. They'll build a business that's making, $50 million, $100 million a year, but there might be clauses in their contract with a VC firm, such as a liquidation preference, where the VC may get 3x for every dollar they put in back before the entrepreneur gets anything. And sometimes that means they could work really hard and get very little reward. So I know it sounds like I'm ringing the death knell of venture capital. That's not the case at all. There are many awesome VC firms out there and angel investors, but it is about they're the exceptions to the rule, I think. And the only way you're going to get to do business with them is if you truly have a business worth investing in. So hold off on capital and focus on finding product market fit. Focus on a value proposition that actually makes sense. So many entrepreneurs build the thing and then ultimately think it's a marketing problem as to why nobody's buying it. It's often not a marketing problem. It's often a value proposition problem. They haven't spent enough time defining what are the key assumptions underpinning our business, be it our customer segment, the problem we're solving, the strength of our solution, the revenue model, the marketing channels. what are the key assumptions that underpin success, define or prioritize by the highest risk assumption, the assumptions that are the highest impact, but that you're least certain about, and then go out and test them as quickly as you can. So with Hotdesk, I mean, I more or less fell into the trap of doing the same thing every day, expecting different results. I believe it was Albert Einstein, or it could be a misquote, who said that that's the definition of insanity, right?
Right.
And that's basically what I did for the first year or so. I thought, no, this is great. We're just going to keep pushing without really tweaking anything about the business. It wasn't until the second year where I started to tweak, but by that point, we weren't bringing enough money in, and our burn rate was more than that. And we could have kept going and just chugging along with whatever fumes we had in our reserve. But again, it came back to that purpose piece. But one thing we do completely different with Collective Campus, totally different, diametrically opposed, is we are testing like crazy across almost every aspect of our business, whether it's our marketing channel. I mean, I could show you a Google sheet with about 500 rows of marketing channels and strategies within those channels that we have tested. I can show you Asana Kanban boards with maybe 300 growth hacks that we have tested across different parts of our business. Even testing different customer segments. So for example, geographically, I could be testing Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, the US, the UK. Then I'd be testing different, say, types of industries with my B2B outreach. Then I could be testing different roles in these organizations. I'm going to test HR, CTOs, CIOs, heads of innovation, heads of IT. Where am I going to get a response? Where do I get a higher response than the average? Does that tell me something? Should we be doubling down on that particular segment? So one thing I've found is we've got a lot of success and traction with law firms. We've got 9 law firms as clients, including Clifford Chance being one of them, which is a big Magic Circle firm from the UK. And we've done work with these guys all over the world. And once you get 2 or 3 clients in a particular segment, you think, okay, there must be something here. So you ask questions, you try to understand more about their needs, and you find that those needs are prevalent across the entire industry. And then you can target them accordingly using the right language, using the right marketing channel, using the right proof points based on the work that you've already done with law firms. And then that just helps you generate that snowball effect. But you wouldn't know that unless you actually did the testing in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a really important point for entrepreneurs starting out their businesses. And for, say, there's a solo founder or a team of 2 or 3 that's just starting out and they don't have that many resources at their disposal. Would you recommend, as far as testing their concept, perhaps their product, is it more about just talking to people, talking to potential or current customers, or more, surveying online or creating a landing page and trying to drive Facebook ad traffic to see a response to that? What would you recommend for the entrepreneur, the really small, lean team that's just starting out?
Yeah, so for the small, lean team, it really is a lot of that stuff that you mentioned, because it's not about testing whether the product works. It's about really coming back to the problem, the solution, and the customer segment, and perhaps even the price point, but that comes next. So ultimately, defining what is the problem, what is the solution? Who is the customer segment? Where can we find them? Are they online or are they offline? There's a great case study from not a small team, but from an insurance company here in Australia who decided that they wanted to test market appetite for a insurance policy that would give you access to gyms all across the country. And the way they went about doing this was not just asking people, because if you ask people yes or no questions, you'd often get false positives. You get the counterfeit yes, because it's much easier to say, yeah, I'd buy that. Yeah, that's a cool idea, because you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, than it is to actually pull out your wallet and pay for it. So what this insurance firm did was they basically decided, well, who's the customer segment? Well, they asked themselves, who's the customer segment? And the segment was young professionals who travel for work. 2, where can we find them? Outside of gyms, perhaps before the workday begins and after their workday ends, so at 7 a.m. and at 7 p.m. And so they'd then bunker down outside of, say, Virgin Active and places like that, and they'd offer them an incentive. So it could be, say, a protein bar to just get 2 minutes of their time, because usually if you just say, hey, can I speak to you for a second, people will just walk right past you.
In New York especially, yeah.
Yeah, especially in New York. So hey, you got to sweeten the deal with the protein bar. Excuse the pun. And then they basically not only say, "Hey, this is what we're thinking about doing," they actually pose as a legitimate. They didn't use their brand. They just used a brand they made up, made themselves out to be like an insurance tech startup. And basically tried to sell the product. Said, look, we realize that young professionals travel a lot for work. And when you're traveling, gyms usually want to charge you upwards of $30 for a casual entry, which is really expensive. We've come up with this new policy that will give you access to gyms all across the country. We've got a special offer. You can sign up today for X dollars. And here's the sign up form. Effectively, you're trying to get people to actually sign up to elicit real world behavior. Will people pay for this? I mean, in this case, they had a lot of people signing up. And as soon as they signed up, they basically said, look, it doesn't actually exist yet, but thanks for your cooperation. Here's a movie voucher for you. If you'd like to join our mailing list, we'll let you know as soon as it is ready. And people were like, yeah, cool, that sounds great. They obviously didn't feel like they had their time wasted because they did get a protein bar and a voucher. So they're the kinds of things that people can do within the offline world. And online is really simple. I mean, it's running your ads, whether it's Facebook or some other platform where your customers or your prospective customers are hanging out, directing those ads to a landing page. And those ads should clearly articulate what the problem is. And then if they click on that, they find out more about the solution on the landing page. And then ultimately you want to see how many people will sign up to, say, early access. That could be a simple call to action button you have above the fold. You want to keep those pages simple. Don't confuse people. Focus on the value proposition and learn from that. You're probably not going to get many signups initially, and that's when you want to start tweaking the copy you use, the problem statement, the solution, the customer segment, until you start to see a difference. And one example I can share there is where we did some work for a big insurance company, again, somehow insurance, but in this case, it was for a mobile holistic health management app. And we tested this across a number of different segments: young professionals, blue collar workers, white collar workers, hospitality workers. And we found that with blue collar workers, we got about 3 times the click rate on ads, and then about 2.5 times the sign up rate on the website for the same amount of clicks roughly. So we found that that was definitely the place to double down. And that organization has since had quite a bit of luck with that particular segment. But if you didn't do the testing, you wouldn't really know where to begin. So that's absolutely critical. And the testing doesn't need to cost a lot of money. You're talking, if you're spending money on ads and landing pages, a few $100s will get you a hell of a lot of learnings.
Definitely. It sounds like getting that financial commitment is really the pinnacle of what you can do, even if you don't have a product, right? So it sounds like you should be aiming for some sort of financial commitment. If not, maybe a sign up on an email list for more information, something along those lines. In other words, providing them some value, even if you don't have the product available. Is that right? Or what ways can you leverage to get people to provide some information to you when you're building it out? I guess just broad, so you're saying like protein bars, that sort of thing.
That's one thing you could do in the offline world. I mean, in the online world, it could be something like get early access. That usually works well because then they feel like they're special in a way. People want to feel special. But ultimately, like if you make it really clear what the value proposition is, and that's clear to them, then something like getting early access to that is going to make a difference. Like if you tell me that, hey, I built this tool that's going to help you identify prospects that are about 90% chance of closing based on media mentions, then I'm really interested in that. And if I can get early access to that tool, then I'll get it right now. So if anybody's listening and they want to build that, awesome, go for it. But that's the kind of thing. But even if it's not that, even if, when I first started with Hotdesk, what I did was I posted an advertisement on a website called the Australian Institute for Company Directors. And I was posing as if I was looking for a non-executive director when really I was just looking for feedback. And I ended up scoring about 30 meetings with, I suppose, prospective directors who were a mix of corporate executives with a wealth of experience as well as startup founders who'd successfully built companies. And they met up with me. It cost me nothing more than a couple of coffees. So the whole exercise of meeting 25 people in this space cost me about $100. It ultimately exposed me to a lot of questions and holes in Hotdesk that I hadn't thought about. And so with every meeting, I learned new things. And with everything I learned, I improved my pitch so that by the time I actually started speaking to those investors on the back of that article, I was in a much better position to allay some of their fears and to answer questions that they had about the business model, thanks to all of these initial conversations. But the thing about those initial conversations, going back to the market validation point, was most people thought that this was a great idea. Now, they perhaps weren't the direct market, so that's one pitfall you can fall into, testing your idea with people who aren't really the market. And something people do is, my family thinks this is a good idea. My friends think this is a good idea. That's never a great place to derive market validation from. But in this case, I mean, I had seasoned corporate executives and startup founders who were saying it was a good idea. I then moved forward, and before that prototype, all I had was a landing page, and that landing page got me about 50 signups from say traveling business people and freelancers and things of that sort. And so then I just emailed them and had a few phone call conversations and just wanted to find out more about them. I mean, did they want to book space for an hour, for a day, for a week? How much do they want to spend? What sounds good to them? What value are they looking to get out of a space? Is it just a desk, or do they want a community? Do they want access to facilities? Do they want it to be in a CBD, or do they want to be in some sort of hip inner suburban district? Like, what is it? So learning as much as you can early on. I like to call that learning on investment. How much can I possibly learn with the smallest possible outlay in time and money? So there's a number of different things you can do in that space.
That's all great advice. And like you were saying, speaking to these customers or potential customers, you not only sharpened your value proposition, but you kind of rehearsed when you were asking for money later on. So everything kind of builds up as you go along this journey. And so going back to that point really quick, so say an entrepreneur listening to this podcast has followed your instructions. They've spoken with potential customers, they created a landing page, but they're sort of hearing crickets when they release their MVP. What advice do you have for those entrepreneurs? Is it more continuing to hammer down the value proposition or something else?
Well, it depends on, so it could be one of two things. Either the value proposition is not right or their marketing is ineffective. So I think that a lot of that comes back to really defining the customer segment accurately, understanding that persona, where do they hang out online, what interests them, and then if you truly understand that customer persona, the problems they're facing, how much money they have to spend, what drives them, where they hang out online, then your marketing should reflect that, the language you use, the marketing channel you use, the branding you use. And if that's still falling over, then to me, it sounds like there is something you've not quite figured out with your problem solution, the value proposition. Maybe the problem isn't big enough. That's one trap that entrepreneurs fall into. They think, oh, yeah, no, I'm going to solve X problem. But the thing is, like, one thing I tell entrepreneurs I work with is you've got to be an order of magnitude better for people to really pay attention. Because if you're just a little bit better or a little bit cheaper, that's not good enough. And that's something that Karen Dillon and Clayton Christensen talk about in their book, Competing Against Luck. Right. Because people have a hell of a lot of problems, but usually they're quite happy with the way they deal with them. I once presided as a judge at a pitching competition here in Melbourne, and one of the entrepreneurs had an idea for a YouTube parental control system. And I asked, one of the questions you should ask yourself in that space is, well, how are people currently solving this problem? If you're taking a solution to the world and you're just getting crickets, how are people currently solving this problem? And I asked him this question, and he basically said, well, YouTube has a built-in parental control system. There's a number of other companies trying to get into this space, haven't had much luck. And so I thought, well, why are you different? Well, we've got this little feature that, it makes it easier to set up. And I thought, well, that's probably not going to be enough. Yeah. I think most people are just going to use YouTube's built-in parental control system. It's got to be 10x better for people to really care, to excite them, because everywhere you go, you look at your computer, you look at your phone, you walk outside, you see a billboard, you see an ad on a taxi. There is just marketing absolutely everywhere. but we tune out 99.9% of that stuff in order to function in society in some meaningful way. So if you're getting crickets, chances are your value proposition just is not compelling enough, particularly if you think you've nailed the customer segment and the marketing channel.
Right. Right. And we just have a few minutes here, but I would like to ask you one quick point here. You mentioned a couple minutes ago that you worked with an external developer when creating your first startup. And there's a lot of talk, at least among people that I speak with or online, people that aren't necessarily technical, that are trying to either find a technical co-founder or figure out the best way to get their product out there, preferably at the cheapest price. And so, speaking as someone that has worked with an external developer, do you first recommend it? And whether you do or don't, what can you do to maximize the odds it's going to be a good experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Adam. And I think if you're in the really early stages of your business, before you've really got validation or a value proposition and you're just testing, I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense to turn to that because it's much cheaper. Finding a technical co-founder before you even nail the value proposition means that you're not even aligned on what the business is yet. And so alignment with your co-founder, just like a marriage, is absolutely key. So it's worth really honing in on what that value proposition is before you bring someone else in, because it can create not only more expense, but it can create a little bit of friction in the early stages, unless you're absolutely positive that you two are absolutely aligned. I would suggest going to the freelancer.com route or the Upwork route or whatever it is, just finding some hired guns initially. But that does come with a lot of risk, like you said. And that risk can be allayed firstly by looking at people who have a massive portfolio of work, people who have, say, hundreds of ratings and they're a 5-star performer on one of these platforms. But also you need to be very, very, very explicit with your instructions around what you want. And you can't leave anything to chance. I'm a massive proponent of outsourcing in general, not just when it comes to developing products. And I've got Google Docs that are about 15 to 20 pages long, step-by-step instructions just for one thing, complete with screenshots, to make sure that people don't stuff up. And the thing is, when you're bringing virtual assistants or web developers on board from across the other side of the world, you need to also cut them some slack initially. There is a teething period where I find if they make a mistake once, that's okay. You address that. If they make it twice, then you start, that's a red flag. If they make it 3 times, then they're out. Kind of like baseball in a way. But oftentimes I find that the best VAs and developers offshore will learn very quickly. Like they're quick learners, but you just got to be explicit. You need to be clear with your communication. You can't be sending them abrupt emails with 5 words and expecting that they're going to understand what you're talking about. So it requires a bit of emotional awareness in the early stages. But once you get that value proposition, then in order to move quickly, because a big part of entrepreneurship is speed. Speed is fundamental to success. I'm a big believer in John Boyd, former military strategist, a philosophy of observe, orient, decide, act. Basically, the faster you can do all of those, the more likely you'll be to succeed, particularly if you're operating in a very fast-moving competitive landscape. It just means that you're going to learn faster than everyone else, and you're going to make better decisions faster than everyone else. So once you've actually got a value proposition and you want to keep ensuring that your business is learning at a fast pace and making the right decisions and adding the right features and doing so quickly, that's when you want to bring on some in-house tech resources, particularly a CTO. And the benefit of that, not only from a technical perspective, but it is then that you've got someone to share the journey with you, someone who you can bounce ideas off, someone who can allay your, say, journey into the trough of sorrow.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Because it's really hard being a solopreneur and dealing with all that stuff yourself. But if you got someone else sharing the journey with you, they'll pick you up when you're feeling down. You'll pick them up when they're feeling down. Hopefully both of you aren't feeling down at the same time, because then there's nobody to pick anyone up. But it really helps, because first year of Hotdesk, I was working on my own. Second year, I brought on a couple of people, and it made a world of difference, perhaps not to the business, but to my mental well-being.
Sure. And when bringing those people on, and if you're looking for a CTO, is it more word of mouth or just getting integrated in the entrepreneurial community and making friends? Is that how how finding a CTO. I mean, there's no quick and easy answer, obviously.
Yeah, there's no black and white answer when it comes to that stuff. I mean, introductions are always preferable to just say finding someone on a job site.
Yeah.
But even then, like every business is different. The way you work is different, and you've got to be really thorough and deliberate in how you go about assessing people's suitability to join your organization or to work with you. Are you aligned in terms of your values? I mean, if I look at some of Collective Campus's values, it's things like radical transparency. So always being comfortable to have those difficult conversations. It's things like extreme ownership. So if we stuff up, taking ownership for that, tracing our steps, determining what we did wrong, what we could do better, and then taking action. It's things like experimentation. So always be testing. Don't jump to conclusions. And also don't double down on the wrong thing if the testing suggests it's not the right thing to do. Now, we've got a number of values like that effectively underpin the way we run our business. And if I'm going to bring someone in and they don't like the idea of taking ownership and they prefer to instead say make excuses whenever something goes wrong, then that's probably not going to be a good co-founder for me. So really understanding what matters to you and making sure that the person you're bringing on aligns with that. I think that's the biggest thing you need to be looking at when bringing someone on.
That's all great advice. And so, Steve, we just talked about the tip of the iceberg in your book, and I invite listeners to check it out. Again, it's called Employee to Entrepreneur. Just to wrap up here, I always ask my guests one final question to conclude every interview. And that question is whether there is one takeaway, one insight, one piece of advice that my guests can give to readers so that readers can implement them right away, right after they listen to this episode. So if I had to ask you that question, what can readers do right now to facilitate that transition from employee to entrepreneur? What would you say?
Right now, to facilitate that transition from employee to entrepreneur, I would say the quickest thing that you can do is the smallest thing. So Cicero used to say, big things always start small. And I'd say bring it back to what we were talking about. Start building some momentum. Whatever idea you've got in your head, put it down on paper, turn it into a Facebook ad, see if you get any clicks. Maybe you do. Maybe that's enough to give you a little bit of a dopamine hit and stimulate those reward receptors in your brain to keep you going forward. Kind of reminds me of what Tim Ferriss says when it comes to writing. 200 crappy words a day. Don't sit down thinking that you need to write 10,000 words, a masterpiece. Just sit down thinking that you need to write 200 crappy words. And once you do that, you'll find yourself in a position where, okay, you're building some momentum. You're starting to feel like you're accomplishing something, and it becomes much easier to then write another 2,000 words. And then you go back and you make the quality of those words better. So just start today. If you've got an idea, you've got a view on the customer segment, a problem, a solution, get onto Facebook, maybe run a $50 ad and see what kind of clicks that gets you. You can get them to sign up through Facebook. You don't even need a landing page. You can get those emails and maybe then email them and ask them the question, find out more about them. Are they genuinely interested in your idea? And then just go from there. But you always need to start with the smallest possible step.
Absolutely. Well, that's great advice. And Steve, I want to thank you again for appearing on the podcast. It's been a really awesome discussion. And for those listeners who want to learn more about you or your current work, where should they go?
Sure. So they can find out more about the book and download a free bonus bundle, which has heaps of tools and techniques in there, particularly on experimentation, over at employee2entrepreneur.io. And they can find out more about me at steveglaveski.com, where there are links to my Twitter, as well as the Future Squared podcast, which is about 305 episodes in now. And I'm looking forward to having you, Adam, on the show in the very near future as well.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. Thanks again, Steve, for joining the Power of Bold community. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you so much, Adam, and I want to wish you the best of luck, and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Excellent. Take care. So that was Steve Glaveski, an entrepreneur and author of Employee to Entrepreneur, How to Earn Your Freedom and Do Work That Matters. Like I said during the interview, we only scraped the surface of Steve's book. So if you're interested in learning more, don't hesitate to check it out. In the US, it comes out on January 9th. So that's it for this episode of The Power of Bold. 2019 is off to a strong start, and I'm excited to keep exploring these topics with you. If you ever want to get in touch, whether that's to offer constructive feedback or even suggestions of future guests, send an email to adam@thepowerofbold.com. I read each and every email, so I look forward to hearing from you. So thanks again for joining me on this episode. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Bold. For show notes and a transcript of this episode, visit thepowerofbold.com. Feel free to get in touch by visiting our Facebook and Twitter pages. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. We'll see you next time.